all of us wrestle with a terrible fear of failure. And that fear of failure constantly impedes our creativity. Now, what is it that we are afraid of when we are afraid of failing? I don't think it's necessarily a sort of material suffering, because many of us here are above material suffering. We live in the global West. We have a safety nest in some capacity, and we have several systems that saves us from the worst kinds of material deprivation. But what I think is we don't have anything that saves us from humiliation. And that's the thing that we are most terrified about. Being humiliated. That's the thing that we need to find a way to overcome. And you may be wondering why I'm talking about failure in a conference about a challenging question very kindly posed to me by Lesley and Brendan at the UKAA. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. This question of what's the big challenges in delivering our sustainable future. I think it is something to do with the humiliation. It's that fear that keeps us running, but also keeps us stifled and not creative. And one of the great enemies of creativity in a corporate and a personal level is this fear of failure. Oh, right. Okay, I forgot about that. Okay. Right. Okay. Sorry about that. Where was I? Yeah, we need to find a way to overcome this fear. Failure is bad. It feels terrible, and at worst, it's scary. But fear is much, much worse. And I'm here to give a different perspective on our corporate lives, and I believe this is where architecture can be helpful. My name is Muyiwa Oki. Some of you might know me as the Millennial President. I'm the first Black incoming president of the Royal Institute of British Architects, and I am an architect at Mace Group Limited. I'm about challenging, I'm about taking names and connecting, and I believe we're here as part of the cohort of built environment professionals to challenge business as usual. But most of all, I'm here to give my young, long-term view on what we need to do to deliver our sustainable future. I stood up for president for the RIBA following a grassroots campaign over in summer, alongside my peers, which focused on speaking up for the future architect. I didn't know it then, but the platform I stood on was a winning one because it was irresistible. I looked creatively at how the next generation can take responsibility and ownership of the built environment, focused on a future plan that is agile and accessible, innovative and aspirational, to make architecture a creative pillar for the design and construction industry that drives digital excellence, and while we're at it, increase the average salary of the architect. So that's me campaigning over the summer. And so how do you make a change and deliver a sustainable future? My answer is by being creative and making the change that you want to see irresistible. The American author Tony Cade Bambara said, "The creative's role is to make the revolution irresistible." I believe to build a more sustainable future, we all need to be creatives in our capacities. And in this revolutionary time that we are living, we need to amaze people into changing course, because as human beings, we learn through irresistible stories and precedents. The scale of what we are facing is challenging. Humans have already caused over 1 degree of global warming, and we are on a path to exceeding this 1.5 degrees target set by the IPCC. And in the report, they spell out how difficult it is to achieve this 1.5 degree limit unless we drastically slash our emissions. Basically, the world is burning up. We already knew that. And if the United Nations is to be believed, by the year 2100, the world will have a population of about 11 billion people. That's 3 billion more people than the planet houses today. And to house all these new people, we need to build about 2.4 trillion square feet of civic space. That's equivalent to adding to the planet a New York City every year for the next 40 years to address this challenge. And for this, we need creatives. My aim here is not to lecture or quote stats and figures or call out corporate entities, but to persuade you to always remember this truth that I hold dear. To be an innovator in the civic arena, you gotta make your proposition irresistible. That's my young, long-term view. And cities are the big deal in this endeavor. We pretty much all have to live in them. We should try hard to get them right. So few cities are nice, and very few new cities are appealing. Embarrassingly, the more appealing ones tend to be old, which is weird because we're mostly good at making things now, like cars and planes and phones. So why not cities, you know? How did we get here, I say? I think it's because of mass production. And like consumer goods, we mass produce glass and steel, plasterboard, and deploy them in extremely similar ways across our cities. And in doing this, I would posit that the principle is never to make our cities, these types of cities, irresistible, aesthetically and socially appealing, not just economically appealing. So I want to end here by encouraging you, now that we are thinking about ourselves as free from this fear of humiliation that I once said, the fear that constantly impedes our creativity, we should now be able to go out there and make mistakes and make sure that our artistic and creative endeavors and our decides are geared towards the most important things, making sustainable future cities. Because as Nietzsche told us, no creativity can occur without accommodating failure. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Muyiwa. So today we've been charged with the big challenges of delivering a sustainable future. And we've got this illustrious, young, fantastically talented panel who have been walking the talk. And it's such a privilege for us to hear the perspectives. We've got, it's like on drums. We've got Muyiwa there, who's president-elect for our RIBA. So you start September next year, so you've got a little bit of warming up to do, and we're looking forward to your campaigns.
Yeah.
And also an architect, and therefore I would argue you can give the view of the contractor as well. So we've got designer, contractor on the end. That's our representative. Then we've got George Lucas. We've got Greg Lucas from IKEA, who sometimes moonlights for Star Wars, who is our consumer voice, let's say. And IKEA are doing some fantastic things in this space, and we're going to hear a bit more from that. Nisha is the ESG lead for residential funds at Elgin, and Elgin are, as many of you would know, have been leading the space from the investor perspective and definitely walking the talk. And then Elizabetha from Emery Partners, Sustainability and ESG Director, and there isn't anything that this woman doesn't know about ESG. It's amazing. So we're going to have a discussion now about, what do the young leaders of the ESG world think that we need to do differently for creating a sustainable future. And Nero very kindly put up a quote this morning about we are the ones, and I use that term we loosely about the youth of today, we are the ones we've been waiting for, we are the ones driving change. And Muyiwa, you've just talked about an irresistible revolution. I'm very excited to know how we're going to do this irresistible revolution, because I'm there, I'm joining you all, although I'm not young. Well, I am according to Nero, I'm definitely under 60. So anyway, so let's kick off. So, new leadership. Has the old leadership failed? Do we need a change of the guard? How do you think we need to evolve? You know, we're talking revolution here. That takes quite a bit of a step change. Elizabetha, game on? Ready?
That's fine. So in terms of leadership, I think we as a AMRO, as a developers and operators, we have a huge opportunity and of course a challenge as well, because we operate in a market and a regulatory framework that doesn't allow us to currently design buildings which are ready to net zero. So we have an opportunity to actually take the challenge on board and potentially to demonstrate that we can make the difference. We can effectively look at opportunities for reducing carbon emissions on site during the operational phase as well. And then we also have the opportunity to drive design decisions with all our teams and consultancy teams as well. So we can potentially think about the design and the delivering and obviously the operational phase completely differently, with a completely different mindset. When we face a site, we should probably challenge ourselves and ask if we really need to build something new. Potentially we probably need to take as much as possible the existing structures potentially, or if we absolutely need to demolish, is there any opportunity for us for reusing materials on site? And potentially when we design buildings, potentially we have to consider the opportunities of thinking about flexibility or resilience. Is a concept that I think we need to start embracing a little bit more about, you know, retaining the value of our buildings, especially in the face of the climate challenge. So I think there's an opportunity for us as developers, and I think we can take the lead on it.
So there is an opportunity. What's the, and you know, you've got the benefit of being developer and operator. What's the government's role in this? If we're talking about leadership and change, I mean, our planet is burning. We haven't quite, you know, got to the end of this.
In terms of regulations, I think there's an opportunity to actually explain to the government that there is an opportunity to actually deliver net zero. At the moment, we don't have a building regulations that requires us, for example, to track embodied carbon. We are required to track emissions, for example, from in-use emissions, from predicted energy consumption. And by the way, there is a large portion of energy consumption that is currently excluded from the regulatory framework. There is an opportunity to actually include a lot more information in the way we track buildings. We also need to be careful about the metrics that we use, because at the moment it's not even accurate enough, and it doesn't even allow us to compare the performance of the building in a sort of apple by apple approach. We have to look at the overall performance, looking at the embodied carbon emissions as well, because the embodied carbon emissions place a lot of attention in terms of scope 3 emissions, which is something that at the moment we are not even considering. And also the current framework, the current building regulations as it stand, still offers us the opportunity to specify gas-fired boilers, for example, or non-renewable systems. And if we do that as operators, we obviously face a huge challenge, because, you know, what we build now will basically become a stranded asset in the near future. So again, it's something that we as developers and also as operators, we can't afford.
Like I said, there's nothing she doesn't know in this sector. Okay, so just changing tact a bit about coming over to the consumer world, let's say, Greg, and you know what you've divulged about what IKEA is doing in this space, I would say really shows strong leadership. Could you reflect a little bit on, you know, IKEA's journey? Well, first of all, premise what you're actually doing in this space, and then potentially why that came about, how it came about. I mean, if we're talking about sustainability and leadership, this is a really good case study example, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Lesley, and thank you, Brendan and the UKAA for inviting me along. My name's Greg Lucas. I'm the UK and Ireland Sustainability Manager at IKEA. IKEA's a purpose-led organisation. we have a vision to create a better everyday life for the many people. And what does that start to look like in today's world? It looks like a massive reassembly, a huge transformation of our entire value chain to become a circular organization, to tackle climate change, to tackle inequality and develop a fair and equal society, and to enable and inspire the many people to lead a more healthy and sustainable life within the limits of one planet. So we're a little busy on the sustainability agenda, or the people and planet positive strategy, as we call it. I think particularly when we look to our customers, we look to co-create solutions with our customers. Particularly when we're looking at expectations, we know that across the UK and Ireland, the many people are looking for solutions. They're looking for solutions to create a better planet, but also to be better for their pocket as well. And we've seen a whole host of different innovations, programs. Some might call it democratization. We'd probably call it co-creation. One in particular is a fantastic program called Live Lagom. It means in Swedish to live just the right amount. And it's where we bring households into all of our different units, whether it's distribution centres, our stores, and a whole host of other areas in the community as well, to really start to understand consumer sentiment, or the sentiment of the many people, but also to change behaviours to live that more healthy and sustainable lifestyle. It helps us design our products, our People and Planet Positive range, whether that's looking to more recycled content or renewable content, and the whole of our range will be made from recycled and renewable content by 2030. In fact, when we look across the entirety of the People and Planet Positive strategy, it's all focused to 2030, as we're in the decade of climate action. And action is exactly what we need. As we heard earlier on, it is about trying, occasionally making those mistakes, learning from those mistakes and building on it. And we've seen incredible collaboration as well across the retail sector. So it's not just us that's working on this, but being able to make a number of these key areas pre-competitive so that we can work together to solve them.
Thanks, Greg. Just changing tact now, focusing on the money. The changing requirements of the capital markets. Nisha, as I said, LNG have really led the way in this, putting their money where their mouth is, to coin a phrase. How do you see this evolving? I mean, obviously we've got to where we are, funds are putting their money where. How do you see it going forward from here?
Well, I would say currently, business as usual has to be that ESG is top of the agenda. We cannot raise money today without having a robust ESG strategy. And there's lots of regulation that is already out, but that is increasing, and lots of our investors are aware of these regulations, and all of them are requiring certain classifications. So SFDR, which is European, Article 8 or 9, there are some investors that would require us to be a 9 before they invest. So that at the moment is already a necessity for us to even grow. I think where I see this going, whenever we buy an asset, we have to assume that we will be owning it and running it for the next 30 years. And between now and that 30-year point, we think that carbon will be a regulated market, probably taxable as well. So this is not just a sustainability and an extinction of humankind problem. It's also a financial risk. I think with lots of the regulation, I think the key things that are coming out of there is they want good governance. So there needs to be, from the top and the bottom of an organization, a bit like health and safety, it's not one person's problem, it's not the ESG team's problem anymore. It's everyone in between and throughout the process. And that has been quite robustly asked for by our investors. About 30 to 50% of their inquiries are all ESG related, heavily focused on the E and the G, but increasingly on the S. So those are still big priorities. The other area is probably the lender market. So at the moment, there's still lots of good green loans out there. And a lot of them are dangling the carrot to be more green or to improve your green credentials. I think in time, as we all become a bit more green, that will flip on its head and it will become more of a stick. So whilst at the moment you're able to get reduced margins on your loans for being greener, we think there will be increased premiums for a brown site or one that's not sustainable enough. So in summary, you have to be on the path already in order to get any money, and that needs to be robust, and there's increasing requirements for numeric metrics. It's not good enough to do the bit of greenwashing. And speaking of greenwashing, actually, I think greenwashing will start to be penalised by some of these regulations that are already out, and I think potentially with that, there could be litigations coming down the line. So if you're putting information out there that isn't quite correct, I think that could come to bite us with certain investors.
So we'll be comparing carbon with carbon, so to speak, to use Elizabeth's analogy, and therefore essentially a more equal playing field. I'm quite interested about this. You just talked about the information around, you alluded to the information for the golden thread and how, is there not an opportunity actually? We've got this amazing recalibration of health and safety coming through in April next year with the Building Safety Bill, and that, we really, really, as a sector, need to up our game and share, collaborate information, find systems, technologies that help us with that. And to Brendan's point before, I read with shock about the poor 2-year-old that just died of mold inhalation, which is absolutely horrific. ESG obviously covers all of those things, but in terms of the social responsibilities, obviously the governance behind standards and things like that, to my mind, there's a fantastic opportunity to dovetail some of this. We're clearly capable of seismic moves if we're forced to do it. Really good to hear the incentives and the way you think that the market might be going. I guess, Elizabeth, could I just ask you about that, thoughts on maybe interweaving a golden thread? Could we be at the start of a big idea here?
Yes, I think sustainability and ESG in particular can be actually the other side of the point of the golden thread, as part of the Building Safety Act, for example. I think there's a huge opportunity, it's just that obviously it's not regulated yet, so it's definitely something that we should be looking at with great interest. And then us, for example, as developers and also operators, I think we can take again the challenge on board as to mandate and request information, because if we ask for information, if we actually engage with our procurements, with our supply chain, also with our consultancy teams, and ask to be on board in terms of sustainability, then we can drive these decisions and we can drive the industry as well. So we have a huge opportunity, but again, related to sustainability, if we use sustainability as a sort of golden thread, starting with communicating our ambitions with our investors, and then following with strategies at design stage, finding opportunities for reducing emissions, and potentially applying a shadow price in driving the design decisions. If we understand exactly the cost of implementing an energy strategy or an energy solution, for example, on site to reduce carbon emissions on site, rather than then ultimately paying an offset payment post-construction, then we want to understand exactly what is the cost to it, to then communicating that to our investors. And then again, we can track the emissions, and then we can follow the same strategy during procurement, during construction, and then also during operation with our facility managers. We can actually ask them to track the emissions, to fully understand the performance of the building, and then to report that information back again to our investors for any new potential developments, and also to upskill ourselves and potentially the industry.
Muyiwa, just coming to you now, just on that design and the supply chain piece, because obviously you've got design from your angle, then you've got construction and so forth, moving into operations. What do you think about the fact that we could dovetail and collaborate in this area to essentially build that golden thread of sustainability? You've got 2 years starting September next year. Is this something we could potentially ask you to champion?
Yes, and I take up that mantle. I think the question about golden thread is quite important, especially motivating the supply chain. From a construction point of view, I know Mesa working with our suppliers to sort of create their savvy with digital tools. because it's not good that on the sort of tier one contractor side, we are using quite sophisticated digital tools, and we are procuring materials and supplies from sort of, I would say, 20th century suppliers who are using pen and paper. I think that upskilling of everyone within the industry is something that we need to drive and make sure that it's quite apparent, so that we can continue that. We can make sure that golden thread is actually a golden thread. So I'm thinking digital tools, BIM, 3D, 4D, 5D BIM. And that's one of the tenets of my RIBA platform, was to drive digital transformation within the construction and design industry. So yes, that's a key tenet of what I'm about in the next couple of years.
So this information piece that, you know, we talk about collaboration and somewhere to sort of almost like a mothership of information, central source of, single source of information. I'm curious, Greg, you know, with the consumer voice representing us here, you know, I believe that lots of people want to do good. We've already talked about that. How is it that we go from B2B, what we're talking about, and B2C, and, you know, so consumers can make choices? If we're thinking about leadership and leading the way, how is it that we as an industry can be better in helping our consumers make more informed choices? So they're comparing carbon with carbon. What are some of the ideas? You know, we're looking for actionable outcomes here.
And I think when we really delve into life at home, we would call ourselves experts of life at home. Within that, there are a number of key barriers. And the first one that the mass majority of us hold is that living a more healthy and sustainable life within the limits of one planet is far more expensive than what we're doing at the moment. And this is a myth that we automatically look to quash and to co-create and develop with the many people. That it can be affordable, it can be accessible, it can bring people together as well. And I think also painting the picture of optimism. What is this world that we're looking to create? What is it that we're transforming to? Rather than looking so much to the world that would be created when we go, or if we go beyond 1.5 degrees. Let's bring out the optimist in each and every one of ourselves to really look and paint that picture vividly of what it is that we're moving towards. And I think when we start to do that together, whether it's looking at a circular economy, where we look at minimizing waste, we look at huge efficiencies in terms of the materials that we're using in our everyday, it makes a lot of sense. It fits into the way that we live today. It's not necessarily going well beyond kind of the everyday that the many people are kind of looking to develop within their homes and their communities. I think particularly bringing in the social aspect as well, it's not all about carbon. I think when we do look at carbon, it's important to have a really, really clear strategy around it. For us, it's utilising science-based targets. It's taking responsibility for our emissions across the value chain, including those Scope 3 emissions, without necessarily using offsetting. So understanding where those emissions are, understanding the role of various stakeholders across society. But then the social aspect is really key. How do we transform lives? How do we create a positive social impact across the communities that we work in and we influence as part of our everyday? And we're part way along our journey in terms of that. We don't have all the answers, but we're working with a number of organisations and charities to start to really delve into that and measure it. And measurement is key. How we define success, utilising that kind of broader balanced scorecard approach to defining success in the longer term. And we start to see proof points coming out. It changes the way that we invest in society. We invest into recyclers to bring about that transformation into a circular economy, and a whole host of other ESG-based longer-term investments that fit our vision.
So I'm quite interested in sort of the consumer point and creating an irresistible revolution for people to change their behaviours, because ultimately this is about behaviours and consumers. So Nisha, what are some of the engagements that LGIM are looking at in sort of those initiatives?
Yeah, I agree with some of your points, but I think there's a lot of people that are well-intentioned and want to do things for sustainability, but there's also a lot of people that want it to be really easy and for it to be cheaper. And I think that's the bit that we're focusing on, is trying to make it cheaper. So looking at our energy efficiency of our buildings and really trying to calculate how much it costs to live in our building versus some traditional stock. I think at the moment, with all the government help, we think that annually you'd save £600 living within one of our blocks. And without the government help, it could potentially be £1,400. We haven't gone out to put that in our marketing yet because we want that to be robust. I think if we put it out there, we've got to be committed that it's correct and it's achievable.
The journalists in the room just...
So that's the bit that we're focusing on, really trying to get the energy efficiency piece right, because that will make it cheaper. And then there are lots of projects going on with design and trying to work with people who understand ease of living and behaviour, how people behave and how, for example, I hate bin stores. I walk in, I want to throw my bin bag because I'm scared of the rats and I want to run out. I don't want to be in there for too long. But I got a photo from one of our investors in the Netherlands, and he showed this beautiful recycling room. It was painted white. It didn't look dissimilar to this room, and it had everything labelled, and it was clean, and it was washed, and there was air freshener everywhere. And that's the kind of thing we need to start thinking about now, is we can't just, forget our responsibilities with the residents, because with Build to Rent, we own everything, every tap, every recycling bin, and those behaviours we can influence as the designer, builder, and operator of all these spaces. So I think for us, the focus is going to be on trying to make it easy or easier and trying to make it cheaper.
Yeah, there's definitely something about making something irresistible to go into a bin room. That's quite a tall order, but well done.
I've got the development team to handle first. I'm still working on them.
I think these swallows are quite nice. There's lots to be said about getting graffiti artists in and so forth to kind of mix it up a bit with sustainable paint, of course. Lisbetta, what kind of initiatives on the coalface is AMRO looking at as an operator, sort of to change those behaviours? And I know that Greg's got a lot to say about comms as well, but what's AMRO up to?
Yeah, I think what we are looking at the moment is about the use of technology, and because I think we can use technology to track emissions, to track the performance of the building, to obviously look at tracking potentially and quantifying water consumption, waste consumption, and all a sort of other elements. But then that technology bit would also allow us to communicate these findings to our customers as well, and they will be more informed about what they are consuming, but also potentially they will help us make more informed decisions the way they will be using their units and their buildings, their homes. And then linking back to the social aspects, which is obviously fundamental, especially for a build-to-rent operator, we also have an opportunity to engage with our customers differently. And then working with the facility management team, we can operate the building in a way that we can offer opportunities for engagement with the local community. And also, I think we can work with our, expand the concept of building a community from a building perspective to the local perspective as well, potentially engaging with local businesses and creating, specific values, or potentially working with local authorities as well to really look at, potentially reinforcing the concept of community, which is not necessarily focused to our customers only, but can expand as well.
Muyiwa, you're doing some work in this space, aren't you, in terms of building educational facilities? I know we're sort of slightly going out of the scope, but actually the cross-sectional learnings around how you take things from different areas.
Yes, exactly. And I think for our clients, because we work on quite major programs with the Department of Education, what we're trying to do is sort of give that a bit of information about what the sort of energy footprint would be for the projects that we're working on, because clients now are more savvy, and also the end users are also savvy. When coming back into sort of housing a scenario, people would want to make I think choosing where to live more and more is going to become a political decision. And if you give more information about how energy efficient or how carbon related your apartment could be, people are going to change their mind or have that as a filter to why they want to live in this apartment as opposed to that apartment. And the more information that you give, the way we're doing it with the Department of Education, you can do that in a sort of housing sector as well, so that people can actually make that informed decisions. Because as Greta Thunberg inspired generation, we are more savvy. We know the numbers. We know what good looks, what we want from our spaces, and we would like to get that information so that we can make the right decisions and be part of the future that we want to be in.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the audience if they've got some questions in a minute. So put your hand up so the microphone can come to you. But in the meantime, whilst we get the scouts going around the room, just speaking about cross-sectional influence and so forth, I just wanted to touch on, Greg, you shared with us in the preparation for this panel something that IKEA are doing, which came as a surprise to me, but also kind of like swimming outside your swim lane, if you like, in terms of the investment into social housing in Ireland and why that came about. Could you just reflect just briefly on how it came about, why you did it, what you're doing?
Absolutely, and we look for those opportunities to make our vision a reality. And one of the areas we saw was investing directly into building 250 new social housing units in and around Dublin. I think this was announced publicly probably about a month ago. And I think the more you look into our investments, it's to look at where's that long-term opportunity. In this case, it's around looking to the long term. How can we provide social housing to the many people in Ireland? Look at developing a model that can be replicated globally through our investments potentially as well. But looking at returning that housing to the local authorities at the end of that lease. Now, I don't in any way confess to being an expert in this area, and it is a new area in terms of IKEA or Inca investing in. But it ties in closely as well to what happens within those properties. When you mentioned the small behaviour change, those small steps, and when we look at the Live Largon programme, through our partnership with Middlesex University, we found that for each household they could save £1,400 a year. This is pre-pandemic, the research was undertaken. It's likely to be quite a lot higher. Those small steps can add up to a much, much bigger step change within society. So it ties in, both from an ESG perspective, it ties into our vision. It ties into how we can create that better everyday life for the many people, but it ties into supporting the individuals as well within those communities to be able to take those small steps to be able to create that bigger impact as well.
And I know Elgim's doing quite a lot in the social housing space as well. So there's quite a lot happening. So questions, Dom, I saw your hand up.
Cool, thanks, Lesley. I'm not quite sure who to direct this to, so perhaps one for the panel. The idea of trying to capture the cost of energy that a consumer would pay year by year, so let's say between £1,000 and £2,000 a year. If you've got tech in the building that can generate energy that the consumer effectively pays for, but it's a cost to the developer, cost to the investor to actually put in the first place. If that income could be captured by the investor, that could add maybe between 25 to 50k per unit to help pay for the additional costs to make it more energy efficient. Clearly, there's a lot of regulation around energy supply, but I wonder whether anyone has actually looked into this, because it'd be a huge, I think, game-changing piece to the conversation about development viability, investment values.
I'm going to turn to the oracle to my left. Elizabeth.
No, I think this is an absolutely valid point. However, my approach to that, especially from a development perspective that has the opportunity to design building differently, is to actually embrace a sort of fabric approach first, to actually reduce any expenditure in terms of actually utilizing the mechanical systems. Ideally, the ideal building for me is the building that actually doesn't require any mechanical systems. And there are frameworks out there which we are obviously exploring in the light of market availability, etc., to actually allow us to tie in the building building, to build it properly and the high specs so that effectively we reduce energy demand and we barely need any use of energy buildings. PV panels, from my perspective, for example, are not necessarily a technology that we will need to consider. And in fact, internally, we don't even use that as a metric for evaluating energy efficiency. If anything, they create additionality potentially on site. They will need to be maximized, obviously, because if anything, they will help reducing our costs. But ideally, that's the approach for us, is going fabric and passive solutions first, working tirelessly with our design team, also with the delivery team, and then in addition to that, yes, we can rely on technology. Technology, however, shouldn't be seen as a sort of heavily piece of work that needs to be installed. If the building is constructed in the way it should, potentially we can just select representative units just to track the overall performance of the building, being potentially the representative elements of the building. But then effectively technology can be used to actually use applications and way of communicating with our customers in addition to tracking emissions. So it's a bit much more than that, much more about quality of construction rather than extra cost for actually additional kits that we need to install on the buildings.
It's quite encouraging to hear that it's a more accessible, we don't have to retrofit buildings, but there is a potential for more accessible tracking. We have another question.
Yeah, hi. This is a question for, I think it's Muyiwa. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Hi.
Yeah, hi.
In your initial speech, you talked about quite terrifyingly how we have to build the size of New York every month for however many years. And my question was, how do you think we're going to be able to do that? And I think about the proposition from Saudi Arabia, the line, where they're going to build this huge city in the middle of the desert. And what is your opinion on that? And is that how we're gonna do this?
That's a big question. Mace are actually working on the line, but I'm not in that team, so I don't exactly have a firm opinion about it. In terms of trying to build that New York City a month for the next 40 years, there are ways to do that. There's a scale of products that we could do. It's not too like tall spaces, but it's like not urban sprawl, but not like large towers. I think if we want to get to that level, I think there's much to do with about like a sort of going global in a local sense, and I think in that respect we can first of all cater for the size and the numbers of people we need globally, but also I think we can do it in a way that is more sustainable, that's less energy driven, but it's also has this sort of local social element to it. The line is in my opinion something that is driven by investors who are not as sort of future driven, or they're thinking about the future in a very sort of, not to excuse the pun, very linear way. And I think if we have different solutions that are not just high rise blocks or urban sprawl, but have a mixture of both, is something that a system that we can use to make sure that we can cater for the 11 billion people that I put up in the presentation.
Thanks, Muyiwa. So we've got lunch on now, so I can't keep the wolves from the door. Oh, we've got to do a vote. Can we have one more question? Hands down. Go on, Howard, quick.
Very quick question. Congratulations firstly on holding this session. Howard Morgan, Real Service. I've recently become a trustee of a charity that's working on social isolation and connecting isolated people with their communities. The question comes to mind, particularly at this conference, is do we care about everyone in our community, including those who may not be our future customers and renters? And if so, if we do care, why do we care?
I'm going to slightly circumvent that because I think we do care, but also I guess IKEA's point around actually they've gone out of their swim lane to invest in something different, and I think Elgin is probably in a similar vein. Sorry, I'm hijacking the answer because I'm just conscious of wrapping up for lunch. But Greg, did you want to say something?
And yeah, we've touched on it a little bit around the vision, but particularly supporting the most vulnerable in society is absolutely key. It's key to bringing those the many people on the journey as well. And often when we talk about the many people, it is those with thinner wallets. It is the many, not the few, that need to be inspired and enabled to be able to make those changes, be it the smaller changes we were discussing around behaviour change and laddering up to those bigger changes as well. I'll leave it there in terms of time.
Yeah, I think it ties in nicely with Nero's opening speech about diversity and inclusion and equality. Actually, those are the things that make for a better society, and in the pursuit of excellence, which is something that obviously the theme of this conference, that all of these things make for a better economy, a better society, and obviously a more sustainable environment. So just wrapping up, practical steps for the industry, investing in social housing for a lower return is something that's is working well, we hope. The RIBA 2030 climate change, that's a good reference point. Muyiwa's going to take us.
Yeah, the climate challenge, actually. So we have put together a report on how we can start tracking embodied and operational carbon, as well as health and well-being within projects. And we implore you to look at it and use it as a first step for how to think about these issues in your projects.
Thank you. We've got data transparency and energy consumption standards, so legislation and industry-driven standards, motivating the supply chain and the movement to strive for net zero and carbon positive. Collaboration, that's a massive part of this, vein, and integration across the sector and supply chain, hopefully leading to what might be the platinum thread versus the golden thread. So is part of our irresistible revolution as we go into the next 10 years. Oh, Greg wants to say something.
Just to continue the debate, I'm sure there are many other questions out there. We have a stand towards, I think, the back of the exhibition centre where the IKEA team and myself will be if anyone has kind of further questions for discussion.
Thanks, Greg. And I believe that as delegates and panel speakers, you're going to be around as well. So lots to discuss. I'd like you to say thank you to the panel, and it's onwards and upwards with our circular sustainable economies.